what I'm looking at here is this document that I threw together with just a bunch. It's kind of a grab bag of different resources, and I'll go through a bunch of them. But I wanted to, have something that's easily shared, and so I'll share a link in the Discord, and I'll make sure that this is easily available to anyone who's interested. So I'll come back to this, but I'll go through some of the more key links right now, and especially the ones that make it easier to build BNS apps. So again, I'll zoom in. So I've built a library called BNSX client. This is basically a JavaScript, TypeScript library for building BNS apps. There's a couple different, interfaces that are exposed by this library. There's some API call type of thing. So that's just kind of like fetching data. There's some contract call related utilities and just other sort of generic utilities. And I'll go through those kind of one by one. And again, this link is in that document that I'll share. So the first part of functionality that's exposed here is just API call related utilities. Interacting with this part of the library is pretty simple. You kind of instantiate this API client, and it's got a few key methods. So the first one is getting a display name for an address. The more maybe technical name for this kind of thing is reverse resolution. So if you have a Stacks address, you can fetch, okay, what is the BNS name that I should show for this account? And so it's a nice, easy way to bootstrap kind of like account labeling in your app. So if you look at like an NFT marketplace, this is handled, for example, like on Gamma, they'll show a BNS name. So to do this, you just have a specific Stacks address called get display name, and that'll just return a single string. If the user owns more than one name, it's got some logic for sort of like only returning one in a kind of consistent way. And again, this is really nice and simple way to either show kind of a human readable label for a specific account, or maybe for the account that's logged into your application. Yeah. And then the next is getting name details. So this is, you've got a specific BNS string and a name string, like right here, we've got example.btc. And this makes an API call to return a bunch of fields related to that name. So you can get things like who owns this name? What's the expiration block that this name expires? What's their zone file? And there's some other utilities that I'll get into, but a zone file is basically a way for the owner of a name to associate a bunch of data with that name. So we already kind of know like what's the name, who owns this name, but you can set other things as well, like your Bitcoin address or your Nostr public key, or for example, a redirect if you want, to kind of enable like a Web 2 interface to a name. There's a bunch of fields related here. So if you need to look up a name or even just check, is this name already registered? This is a handy utility for you. And then we've got a method to basically fetch all the names owned by an address. So the previous method I showed you was like, given an address, what's the one simple just display name to show? But if you're building a more fully featured BNS app, you'll want to know, okay, like not just the single name that they've got, but give me the whole list of names that they have, and so, as well as extra properties associated with them. So again, a bunch of different fields here. We do return this display name as well. It's the same exact string that it's returned from that other method. And then we've got an array of all of the names that they own and the properties, etc. So these are the main API call utilities. So if you just need to kind of like fetch data, then those would be really helpful for you. Next up, we've got utilities for interacting with the contracts, both BNS and BNSX contracts. I went into some detail on this on Thursday, but for those who missed that, BNS, the Bitcoin name system, is this core protocol. It's been around for years. It's got a bunch of usage, And BNSX is a protocol that I've launched recently. It's built on top of BNS, so it's not like a separate naming system or anything like that. It's just a protocol that adds some extra functionality on top of BNS. For example, it allows you to own more than one name in a single wallet. It allows you to use names as like a standard NFT, kind of exposes like the standard Stacks NFT interface. And so this library's got helper methods for not only interacting with the BNSX contracts, but the BNS contracts themselves. So to get started, you very much like the API client, you import this client, and it's got a bunch of utilities based in here. So at a high level, it's got accessors properties for individual contracts. So BNS core is the core BNS contract, the contract that's been around forever. And then the other contracts are all BNSX related, where the registry is kind of the main contract that holds like BNSX specific state. Now, this part of the library is really built on top of a tool called Clarigen. So Clarigen, and again, this is linked in that document that I'll share, but it's basically a way of getting type-safe JavaScript interfaces to any Clarity contract. So if you're building Clarity contracts, you might, or apps that interface with Clarity contracts, you'll find that there's kind of a lot of boilerplate, and it's not entirely type-safe in terms of like you call some contract function with some arguments. By default, with a lot of developer tools, that's not type safe for you. You have to kind of say, and this is an integer and this is a string, etc. And this just basically has a bunch of utilities for automating all of that boilerplate. So you get a nice kind of like JavaScript native API to interact with these contracts. That's just kind of a background. And this, the Clarigen docs here will just help you kind of understand how to build your apps that integrate with these Clarigen interfaces that are exposed by this library. And so I've got a couple different examples of things to do here. So the first thing you can do is call read-only functions. In Clarity, these are functions that don't modify the state of the contract at all. They're just basically methods that make it easy to pull data from a contract itself. So for example, we've got a method here that says like get the primary BNSX name for an address. Right here, we've got a function call to get the price of a specific name. So if you're building an app that's helping users register DNS names, this is really helpful because each name has like a different price function. .btc names cost this, or .id names cost that. Some of these namespaces, which is like the .btc or .id part of the name, they cost a different amount based on the characters in the name or the length of the name. This is just like a handy utility to get that price. And these are just some examples, but the way this library works is that every single contract method exposed by any of these contracts is available as a helper function here. So in the BNS contract, there's a function called get name price. And this is, just showing how it's exposed here. But if you're ever browsing BNS or BNSX contracts and there's a specific function exposed, it's guaranteed that there's a function also exposed through this library. And then making transactions. So this is like not just getting data, but modifying data. So if you're like transferring a name, you're modifying the state of these contracts. And if you want to start making contracts, I've got an example here, but really the Clarigen documentation has more detailed documentation here, especially for not only in React apps, but in Svelte and Vue and different frameworks. So you've got these examples here. And then this library also is kind of uses microstacks under the hood. This is another library that I've linked in that document. But this is for like even more detail for you to see like, okay, what's going on here? What are all the options that are exposed? So I've got an example here for transferring a name, if you wanted to do that. Here is an example for registering a BNS name. And so to register a name on BNS, there's two steps. First, you pre-order the name, and you have to kind of like construct these, like it follows a commit reveal pattern. And so you need to be, without going into too much detail, this library exposes a bunch of the methods that you might be thinking like, okay, how do I do this? This kind of makes it a lot easier. So you have this name pre-order step, and then you have this name register step. And at that point, you've got the name registered. Again, for transferring a name, for unwrapping a name, I'll link, I have a link to the BNSX protocol documentation too. So if this is kind of like gibberish to you, then I totally understand. I've got links to help you learn more. And then beyond just API calls and transaction kind of helpers or contract call helpers, there's a bunch of other utilities. So I mentioned a zone file previously. This is like how name owners can associate information about their name. And a zone file is like just one big string, and it follows this zone file standard. And so it's not very easy to like parse it or modify it, if you're just doing it from scratch. But fortunately, there's developer tools out there that make this easy. And this library exposes a bunch of those, helpful things as well. So there's this zone file class that basically exposes like some helper functions to get data and then also to modify data. And there's some examples here. Like if you wanted to get the Bitcoin address associated with the zone file, it's just one simple kind of line of code. Or if you want to get, any arbitrary record from the zone file, we've got that as well. And then again, just a bunch more utility functions. So we've got utility for converting between bytes or like a buffer and ASCII. And this is because at the contract level, all names are stored as raw bytes. They're not, human readable, but you can easily convert them back and forth to ASCII, which is like the human readable version. So if you're getting data off of the chain, it'll be like in raw bytes, but you can convert it easily to the human readable version and vice versa. And a bunch more here that you can read about. Some information about like, does a specific namespace expire? I talked about how they have different price functions, but they also have different expirations. So .btc names only expire after 5 years. And some of them are every 1 year, and some of them actually never expire, so you don't have to renew them. And finally, there's some Punycode helpers. And so I mentioned how all names are basically like just in ASCII form. There's a limited set of characters that are allowed in BNS names, but you can use Punycode, which is this interesting standard for basically storing Unicode in an ASCII string. And so again, a bunch of helpers here that you can read about. So yeah, that's what I really wanted to share today, is this BNSX client. That's a hopefully really helpful developer tool for you. And so I'll go through some of the other resources that I've linked as well. So here we've got the BNSX documentation. So this is documentation for the protocol itself, also related to Dots, which is a web app that we've built to use BNSX and just use BNS in general. But within here, we have documentation about what the BNSX protocol is, what the different contracts are, where you can find those contracts. We've got contract documentation for like lower level documentation. links back to the BNS client, etc. Here, we're looking at the GitHub repository for the BNSX protocol, and this is actually a mono repo. So it includes all of the BNSX contracts as well as all their tests. That's under the contracts directory. We've got the source code for the web app. So again, the web app is dots.so, and all of the source code for that is available here. So if you want to kind of see some real world examples of like how, I'm building contract call transactions for these contracts, that's an example. Also the source code for the API, if you wanted to dig deeper into that. And yeah, those are really the BNS related developer tools and resources that I wanted to go into. So again, I'll share this link here. I've got a bunch of other links as well. So this MythBTC site is a BNS and Stacks and Bitcoin community member who's done a really good job of putting together, resources and how-to guides and links for BNS. So there's a bunch of information here. What is BNS? How do you use it? Etc. It's also got information for ordinals and stacks in general. So this is just a great resource, maybe more user-focused, but regardless, it's great. Again, micro stacks, this is like for really building web apps is where it's quite helpful. Clarinet is a tool developed by Hero. It's an amazing tool. I use it constantly, and that's really for building Clarity contracts. Clarigen, I briefly spoke about it earlier. This is a tool, basically, it's built on top of Clarinet. So it's kind of like, part of this, a package of tools. And this is to give you type-safe, like JavaScript interfaces to interact with contracts. So not only in web apps, but also when you're writing unit tests, it's really helpful. Clarity Bitcoin it's a Clarity contract, open source, and it's a really fantastic smart contract that you can basically copy and paste into your set of contracts. And it's got these utilities for parsing Bitcoin transactions. This is like layer 1 Bitcoin transactions. And then also verifying if a specific Bitcoin transaction was mined. So if you're building an app, for example, my wish list item of buy a BNS name with Bitcoin, you're gonna want to use this because it's got all the logic that you need to see, did this Bitcoin transaction happen? Was it sent to the right address? Was it of the right amount, etc. And then finally, OrdiSwap is a contract that I kind of hacked together a couple of weeks ago when Ordinals was really popping off, and it's a Clarity contract in CLI to let you make a swap between a specific ordinal and a stacks-based asset. So you can use to see how are these types of swaps constructed. How do you use the Clarity Bitcoin contracts under the hood to make this easier? And then how do you call these transactions kind of via JavaScript? So yeah, that's all that I wanted to go into. Again, I'll share this. I'll add actually my Discord ID to this document. I forgot to do that. But if you're building apps related to BNS or just Stacks apps or apps that use any of these resources, I'll be hanging around the BTC Olympics hackathon, but also just feel free to reach out and I'll see if I can help.
Super. Thanks so much, Hank. This is very helpful.
Great.
So yeah, I'd like to invite you to our Discord server if you have time, of course, and then I'm sure a lot of people would love to reach out to you, bounce ideas off you, because we still have 2 days before the cutoff for idea submission and team formation. So I'll send you a quick note after this talk so we can really introduce you to all the curious and ambitious hackers and builders out there in our Discord. And thanks again for sharing. This is you guys put in a lot of work to make this possible. So thank you for your contribution and continued contribution to Bitcoin and Stacks. This is going to save so many people a lot of time, right? Bring us closer to that sustainable Bitcoin economy that
Right.
we're all working towards. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
Do you
you.
have
Thank you.
any
I appreciate it.
final words or thoughts or encouragement for the developers out there before we jump?
The final thing that I wanted to touch upon is the prizes. And so we're giving to two big prizes. First, for the most technically innovative project that uses BNS or BNSX. And so this is really related to like, are you doing something novel and technically interesting and challenging? That's $1,000. And then for the best app from a kind of like consumer or user experience or product market fit standpoint that uses BNS, that's another $1,000 prize. So hopefully that kind of, adds some extra motivation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely that is a nice chunk of change. But I think the real prize is actually the winners get to speak with you after the hackathon, right? To see how to turn those projects and go beyond the hackathon, right? So that I think that's the real prize. But yeah, some people like I mean, it's nice to have some cash too. So thank you for your contribution.
I might be helpful, but cash is cash. Everyone could use some. Yeah.
Right. Cash is king. Cash is king.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
So thanks for giving us both. Yeah, and we'll make sure people know that in our Discord. And shortly after this, we're gonna send you a Discord invite. So would love to get you in front of all the builders. Thanks again for coming.
Absolutely.
Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you. It was blessed. Talk to you soon.